I don't trust Bob Fergson still, obviously. I mean, you don't get to erase 12 years of wrong, and really more than 12 years of wrong, by all of a sudden being a fiscal conservative and saying no to a couple things that Democrats want. However, right after our show concluded yesterday, and we talked a lot on the show about our concern about the budgets that were passed by both Senate Democrats and House Democrats, because they include the largest package of tax increases in our state history. Among those tax increases is a new tax called a wealth tax. And essentially, if you have more than $50 million, the wealth tax would target you out and tax you on unrealized gains, which I don't even see how that would be legal or how it would be something that our state government would be able to actually carry out. Bob Fergson seems to feel the same way. He had a press conference and said he will not sign either of those budgets that were passed in the House and the Senate because he does not support the wealth tax.
Neither budget, however, is close to one that I can sign for two key reasons. First, they each propose far too much in taxes. Second, they both rely on a wealth tax, which is novel, untested, difficult to implement, and, most importantly, for purposes of adopting a sustainable budget, will face an immediate challenge in court. If the legislature wishes to complete our work on time, they need to immediately move the budget discussions in a significantly different direction on both of these issues.
Love that. Love that. Yay for you. So I understand what he's saying there, and it is a smart fiscal thing. When you're looking at a wealth tax, in order to balance this budget, which they've included a ton of new spending. We're in a $14 billion budget hole, and they're like, let's spend even more. And then we'll come up with all these new taxes, and then we can keep spending at excessive rates, and then we have revenue that's going to keep up with it. But when you have something like the wealth tax that, as he said, it's untested, it's going to immediately face a challenge. And if you assign money to all of these things that you want to fund, and then the wealth tax is struck down, well, you're in a pretty big predicament, aren't you? You're right back to where you started. And Bob Fergson, it seems like, is saying that he doesn't want to go there. He wants them to be more responsible, to rely on revenues that might not be immediately struck down. So I love that. I think it's good. He's sending them back to the table. This relies too much on taxes. Here's my problem and my caveat, though. The wealth tax is bad, but it's not even close to being the worst of all the taxes that are still on the table. Not the least of which is a massive property tax increase for millions of Washingtonians that will have no limit, that will be tied to inflation, that will be tied to population growth, and will push working class people out of their homes, not to mention retirees. So the wealth tax, to me, is the low-hanging fruit. It's kind of the most salacious because taxing unrealized gains is an insane concept. But for Bob Fergson, it's the safest of all the taxes for him to come out and say, I don't support that. We're not balancing the budget with that. It might not even be feasible or legal. So it makes no sense to build a budget off of it. So I'm very worried that he refused to, on multiple instances during this press conference. I mean, of course, the reporters in the room asked him about the other taxes. Okay, you say the budget is built too much on taxes, but you're singling out the wealth tax as being particularly problematic. What about the B&O tax increases? What about expanding Seattle's failed payroll tax across the entire state? What about the property tax increases? And every time he was asked, he simply said, basically, I'm not answering that question.
On some specific questions you may have, obviously we're still going through that.
Are you entertaining the idea of a 5% payroll tax?
What I'm going to do is have a conversation with both caucuses.
Both budgets are dependent on revenue from the payroll tax. You're pretty clear on one, but so why are you not taking a more clear position?
Because I'm starting with the wealth
whether
tax.
You support it,
yeah.
Maybe not the amount, but you support the tax and you
appreciate the follow-up. My answer is still the same, but thanks for the question.
Where does your support stand for increasing the cap on property taxes?
I appreciate all the questions on different revenue sources.
Appreciate it.
I'm just not going to engage in those, so I appreciate that.
Not
Do
going
you
to
have any
engage
concerns about how that would impact the cost of housing and already expensive state for it?
I have concerns about any revenue source and what that means for businesses, for Washingtonians, you name it.
Have you shifted your stance at all on potential furloughs for state workers?
No. We put those ideas out there for the legislature, as you know, and we've got a very challenging budget situation.
Governor, you stood here a few weeks ago and said, we're not going to tax our way out of this thing. But it sounds like what you're saying today is you're going to have to at some respect, tax your way out of this thing.
Disagree. I mean, we're not going to, by the tax away, what I mean is, hey, a bulk of what we're doing is on taxes. That's the two proposals we have. That's my definition of taxing our way out of it, is what those two proposals are.
Do you have a top line number in your head? Because
Yeah.
I mean, the Senate's got 17 billion, the House has got 15 billion. Do you have a number you?
I have one in my head, but I'm not ready to share, which I hope you understand. Yeah, so
What are
we're
we
having a
doing
lot of
here?
conversation. I just want to really emphasize that. Look, it's, and you all know this, there's a lot of conversations going on. There's a lot of negotiations. There's a lot of critical issues. And bring all that in for a landing in a few weeks is not going to be easy. But do I think it's achievable? Yes, I do.
Yeah. So here's the problem where he says, I'm just not going to, and he keeps, and look, I understand some of this is you're trying to negotiate things right after this meeting. He had a meeting with Senate Republican leadership and Republican leadership in the House. So he's trying to talk to all sides. I get it that part of negotiation is keeping a little bit close to the vest, but you're coming out there and you're saying we can't do it with all these taxes, and you're only committing to not supporting one of the taxes when really it is not. It's bad, but it's not the most significant proposal in terms of its impact on Washingtonians and our business climate. So that has me very concerned. Because similarly, and I think Chris Daniels with Como 4, who you heard a question from him there, you know, that he alluded to maybe a month or so ago, might have been a little bit more than that. You know, Bob Fergson had a press conference where he came out and he said, hey, here's what I think the budget should look like. We've made $6 billion in cuts or whatever it was at the time. But I, on this show, knocked him at the time he had this press conference. He's talking about all these cuts they came up with. But even then, he refused to answer any questions related to, okay, $14 billion budget deficit, you're coming up with approximately $6-7 billion in cuts. Simple math says that you still have billions of dollars to account for, so you support new taxes or no, and he wouldn't commit to it.
But after going through this exercise anyway, are you now leaning more in the direction that you might have to sign off on some tax increases, and what would they look like?
I'd say it's too soon to say right now, Jim.
Our tax, regardless of what type of tax, is just the basic math indicate that some sort of taxes are inevitable.
Look, I'm new to being governor, but I'm not new to the legislature, right? Last time I checked, we've still got 2 months to go in this legislative session. I need to sit down and have a conversation with legislative leaders. What are they finding out? I know they're doing their own work, which is not insignificant. They're leaning into it as well. So at some point, I'll have a better answer to that question, but I just don't think that's right now.
So what did I say at the time when he did that? I said, man, he's setting up his legislative Democrats to take the heat for this. So he comes out at the time, look at me, yay is me. I come up with all these tax cuts or all these spending cuts. Won't answer any questions about taxes, saying, oh, we'll see what the legislative Democrats come up with. So I said he's going to throw them under the bus because he knows the math doesn't math. So if all he could come up with is $7 billion in cuts and we're still short $7 billion, he knows that you have to have revenue to make up that deficit. He just wants legislative Democrats to be the ones to have to propose it. So I said that at the time, and even after his press conference yesterday, I still believe the same thing. Because he's not ruling out these other taxes. He knows taxes are going to have to be part of the equation if they don't come up with all these spending cuts. And so he just wants to look, in my opinion, which is what this show is about, he wants to, at every turn, distance himself as much as humanly possible from the actual decision to implement taxes, especially taxes like what will be a deeply unpopular and harmful property tax increase. And if it were another politician, maybe I wouldn't feel that way. But because of Bob Fergson and how he operates and his, clear focus on what is going to make him look the best, his political ambitions sort of look the best and most promising, that's how I feel. And I said it. This was a tweet I sent out January 17th, okay? And I made a prediction. And I still feel like this prediction is very valid. I said Ferguson is strategically softening people up for the eventual, I did everything in my power to avoid new taxes, but sorry, we have no choice conversation. I hope I'm wrong, but feel free to bookmark this. Bookmark it, we have. Because he knows that that's going to happen. The easiest low-hanging fruit is the wealth tax, probably not even legal, won't even pencil, so he wants them to go restructure the budget without the wealth tax. But if he's not coming out at this juncture, it's April 2nd. there's less than a month left in the legislative session for them to do this work. So if he's not coming out at that press conference at this moment and saying, and also, property tax, absolutely not to that extent. Expanding Seattle's failed payroll tax across the entire state, look what it did in Seattle. We're not doing that. That's not a good decision. Not to mention that the revenue from it will dwindle over time, just as it has done in Seattle. And so that isn't a good fiscal future for us either. So 100%, like, I'm glad he said no to the wealth tax and that he's sending them back to the table. I am also glad there's a little friction finally between Democrats in the legislature and the governor's office, because there just hasn't been that friction previously. But I still think he's just setting them up to be the ones to have to be the bearers of bad news. So, I mean, is the verdict still out? I guess. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he comes out and says no to the property tax increase in particular, as devastating as the other ones would be. I just don't see us emerging from this legislative session with a full Democratic majority with no new taxes. Don't see that happening at this point. The question is, which ones are going to survive? I will say, I don't have this for you, Nicole, but it came into my inbox, so I just want to address it quickly. This morning, 60 business leaders in our state from some of the state's largest businesses. I'm just really quickly reading over the, I see Nordstrom's on here. I see SSA Marine. I see Washington Trust Bank, WaFed, Zillow. So some of our state's largest employers, they have just sent a letter to the four corners of the legislature. So those are the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, talking about the budget. Saying yesterday we were encouraged by the governor's announcement that he would not sign the proposed wealth tax. We support the 5 priorities he outlined as fiscally responsible in these unprecedented times, such as preserving the state's rainy day fund. And we agree with the governor that we cannot just tax our way out of here. And then they go on to talk about the disastrous business taxes that are still on the table, hoping that state lawmakers will take a different path and also rule those out as a source of additional revenue. So the business community speaking loud and clear, as well as the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, Washington Roundtable, the Association of Washington Businesses, in this letter, again, just sent to the four corners of legislature and the media just a few moments ago. So they are hoping that they can avoid the business tax. But again, so there's always loud voices, right? And I love rich people. Rich people are great. Totally jealous. I love it. If I could have 50 mil, 100%. What a cool position to be in, to be angry about a wealth tax because you got $50 million. I don't think wealth tax should exist. I also don't support singling out big businesses for taxation simply because they pay their employees too much money. It's weird. But, they have loud voices. They have a platform. They have money to take on this fight. They have lobbyists to send to Olympia. Who doesn't? Who doesn't have billions of dollars? Who doesn't have lobbyists to send to Olympia to fight on their behalf? You. So when it comes to the people who are down there right now in the ears of the legislature and the legislative leaders and the governor's office saying, hey, don't tax us, don't tax business, you don't have that same representation in the ear of the governor and the legislative leaders and Democrats saying, hey, don't raise my property taxes so high I can't afford to live here anymore. So that has increased my concern, and I feel it in my gut right now, this nervous sensation. It has increased my concern that at the end of the day, the ones left holding the bag for Democrats' inability to budget is you.